Thank you, Sir Adrian. It's wonderful to be here. I am not your usual Vice-Chancellor, for those that haven't met me before. Born in Melbourne, Australia. I'll come back to that later, cricket fans. Met my wife in Côte d'Ivoire. We got married in Belgium, where I had my first global management job at the age of 21. Went back to Australia, joined information technology with a company called Novell. You talk about disruptive innovation. For a while, Novell had 85% market share in network operating systems, and a few years later, they no longer exist as they were disrupted by Microsoft. Then I have 3 American daughters, came across to run the Open University, and now I live in Milton Keynes. So I like to think that in many ways I sort of personify what it is to sort of be a little bit of a global warrior, somebody that sort of is seen from the very beginning in my career, which has always been at the intersection of technology and education. My actual undergraduate degree is in adult learning. That's where I began. And my whole career I have been watching with great fascination. Yes, Tim, I too remember the pre-PC days at all the disruption that's gone on. And it is sort of ironic to me that particularly the Americans tried to define 2012 as the year of disruption, where technology finally met higher education, when you've got wonderful universities like the University of London, who for over 150 years have figured out how to deliver at a distance, and my wonderful university that for 44 years has used the technology of the day, beginning, of course, with that very state-of-the-art technology that I'll talk about later, the color television. So it's fantastic to be here. My job, as best I can, is to make sure I get through my remarks so we leave plenty of time for you to ask all those questions that I hope are on your mind. And the great thing about having Simon Nelson at the end of the day as my Chief Exec of FutureLearn is every question that I don't want to answer, I will ask you to write down to ask Simon at the end of the day, which will work very well. Last year I had the privilege of being made an honorary graduate of this wonderful university, the University of London, and so it feels particularly special to be speaking, not just as a guest, but I'd like to think part of the family now as well, and I'm very, very proud of that. And so many thanks to Sir Adrian for that kind invitation and for inviting me along today, actually. It's the first time I've seen David Willett's freeze-framed mid-speech. That made it all worth it right there, actually. So I'll be passing that on to David next time I see him. You know, there's a lot to be said about Adrian and his groundbreaking, enthusiastic embrace of MOOCs here at the University of London, but I hope you won't mind if I start by talking about one of your predecessors as Vice-Chancellor, the man after whom this hall is named, the great William Beveridge. Back when the University of London's home here at Senate House was being designed, Beveridge told the architects that the building should not be a replica of the Middle Ages, something that tried to pretend it was ancient. Instead, he called on them to create something that could not have been built by any earlier generation than this. It was a laudable aim, and one that led to the creation of the magnificent, iconic Art Deco complex we're sitting in today. That was back in the early 1930s, but Beveridge's vision still carries an important lesson for all of us, because he wanted Senate House to make a statement. He wanted it to show in tile and brick and Portland stone that the University of London was a university for the future, a modern, dynamic, exciting place of learning, one that could look at the contemporary world through contemporary eyes and not be held back by outdated ways of working and thinking. Fast forward more than 80 years, and that is exactly the role being played today by massive open online courses. Far from mimicking pedagogical models that have been around for centuries, MOOCs are something that could not have been created by any earlier generation than this. They use modern technology to teach us about modern life. And for the universities that offer them, they, like Senate House, are a statement of intent. A statement that says, this is an innovative center of learning, an open-minded and progressive place that is looking to the future and will not be bound by its past. Well, that's my opinion, anyway. As you're here today, I'm guessing most of you probably think the same way. If not, it's possible you're in the wrong place. I found out that the open lecture on the politics surrounding prisoners of war between 793 and 1815 is taking place upstairs, and I won't be offended if any of you need to leave now to attend that. We all know that we all know what MOOCs are. It's pretty clear from the remarks earlier today. We all know what MOOCs have the potential to do. But right now, as you heard from Bill, that we're at a crucial stage in their development, and by extension, a real tipping point in the history of higher education worldwide, because MOOCs seem to be everywhere at the moment. Almost all of North America's top universities offer them. FutureLearn has partners from Dublin to Auckland, and Coursera has getting on for 6 million users worldwide. Stories abound of impoverished people in far-flung countries using MOOCs to better their lives, and of busy professionals in developed nations pushing the boundaries of their careers with free courses that are open to anyone with an internet connection and a desire to learn. It's amazing, it's incredible, it's the future, and we all kind of know that. But how many people do? The Open University has just done a survey with the Guardian newspaper, and we found that despite MOOC now being in the Oxford Dictionary, the proportion of Britons who had even heard of MOOCs, never mind taken one, was just about 8%. And the MOOC backlash, as you've heard, has already begun in the US media. Last year, the Washington Post featured, with thinly disguised glee, the story of a MOOC that went horribly wrong. The course was badly designed, the technology didn't work, the students revolted, and the whole thing was scrapped after just 6 days. And if that wasn't bad enough, when you discover the course was supposed to be teaching the fundamentals of online education. By the sounds of things, it was a great lesson in how not to do things, but I doubt that's what students were after. Of course, it's far too early, in my opinion, to be so cynical. Harvard University was founded in 1636. edX only came into being in 2012. It's taken the University of Oxford the best part of 900 years to cement its position as a world leader in education, but FutureLearn isn't even out of its beta phase yet. Change can arrive very quickly, but it inevitably takes a little time to bed in, and that's why the book trade initially completely underestimated Amazon. Why the music industry thought that killing off Napster would allow record shops to carry on selling CDs and mini discs. Last week, I read something by a blogger named Sharon O'Day, who made the point that even Facebook and Twitter didn't immediately become an indispensable part of people's lives. It took time for users to discover their full potential, to work out what these new innovations could do for them. And just like these previous innovations, MOOCs need time to take root in our society. They need time for people to get used to them, to understand them, to start using them in different ways, to discover their true potential. What's important is that while MOOCs are still putting down those roots, we don't allow them to be torn up by the education curmudgeons. The people who fear change, who don't like new ideas, would be very happy if everything stayed just the way it is. Because the biggest barrier faced by MOOCs has nothing to do with technology or pedagogy. The biggest barrier faced by MOOCs is what the historian Michael Dobbs called the tyranny of conventional wisdom. Dobbs coined the phrase in 1 Minute to Midnight, his blow-by-blow account of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The book reveals how, even at the height of the emergency, the US intelligence agents were never sure about exactly where in Cuba the Soviet Union had hidden its nuclear warheads. They knew where the missile sites were, but the actual nuclear devices, that was more problematic. It turned out that low-level spy planes had actually photographed the storage sites on several occasions, but the analysts had discounted them despite clear evidence of military activity. Why? Because conventional wisdom said that the warheads would be kept under strict control by the KGB, stored behind multiple security fences with roadblocks, razor wire, and a host of other extra security measures. At the site in question, on an abandoned chicken farm, the guards hadn't even bothered to close the gate, never mind lock it. The Soviets had been in such a rush to get the storage facility set up that normal rules had been set aside. But the American analysts assumed that because something had always been done a certain way, it would always be done a certain way. Dobbs showed that potentially catastrophic dangers of relying on conventional wisdom. But its impact is by no means limited to the world of military intelligence. You can see the hallmarks in just about every sphere of our life. Last week, you probably saw all the reports about the Rosetta space probe, which woke up from a 2-year slumber as it prepared to chase down and land on a comet. I was absolutely fascinated by it all, mainly because Rosetta is carrying a piece of equipment designed by the Open University, but also because it reminded me of one of my earliest memories, TV coverage of the moon landing. Some of us are old enough to remember that, and I had this flashback as my 7-year-old and 10-year-old sat with me watching Rosetta wake up. But it's a memory that would have been very different if conventional wisdom had been allowed to prevail. Throughout much of the design process, the lunar lander featured a pair of large, comfy seats for the 2-man crew. Flying machines have always had seats, and the designers assumed that they always would have seats. Unfortunately, the seats were so heavy that weight savings had to be found elsewhere. This led to a surreal process in which the ladder from which Neil Armstrong would take his small step was removed, replaced instead with a knotted rope that astronauts could use to haul themselves to and from the lunar surface. Fortunately, 2 relatively junior engineers named George Franklin and Louis Richard were willing to stand up to conventional wisdom, pointing out that for a short, low-gravity flight, there was no need for seats at all. The pilots could simply fly standing up. It took a little while to convince the powers that be, but in the end, the seats were removed. They took with them a huge amount of weight, leaving enough spare capacity for that previously troublesome ladder. The rest, as they say, ladies and gentlemen, well, it's history. The Eagle landed, the knotted rope was left at home, and Armstrong was spared the indignity of taking one small dangle for man and one giant swing for mankind. But you don't have to be working on a multi-trillion-dollar project to see the perils of only thinking inside the box. Hoover, Electrolux, and all the big vacuum cleaner companies told James Dyson that there was no market for his odd-looking bagless creation. Conventional wisdom said that people had always bought vacuum bags and people would always buy vacuum bags. So the big firms sent him packing. Dyson persevered, set up his own company, and within 18 months his invention was the biggest selling vacuum in Britain. His personal net worth is now in the region of £1.5 billion. A decade ago, supermarket chain Morrison's took the conscious decision not to launch an online shopping service. Conventional wisdom said that it wouldn't work, that people wanted to do their weekly shop in person, and that online grocery sales could never be profitable. Morrison's was the only one of the big 4 supermarkets not to offer an online service at the end of last year, and the only one of the big 4 supermarkets to issue quarterly profits warning at the start of this year. It finally started an online service a couple of weeks ago, just as Tesco announced that it had made 170 million home deliveries since Tesco.com was launched. As Morrison's chief executive, Dalton Phillips, told ITN, with sort of a little bit of understated honesty, "I wish we'd started earlier." Conventional wisdom is everywhere in our lives, ladies and gentlemen, stifling innovation, preventing progress, and all too often leaving those who abide by it stranded on the wrong side of history. And education is no different. There's a British photographer called Julian Germain, and he spent much of the past few years traveling around the world taking pictures of children in classrooms. Now, obviously, when you go through his pictures and compare a school in Ethiopia with one in Germany, there are some pretty major differences. But what struck me as I looked at the classrooms on the website was what they all had in common. The clothes the children were wearing might change, and the buildings themselves might be less run down or more colorful or better equipped, but the basic model remains the same from Darlington to Bangladesh. Students sitting at desks facing a teacher who stands at the front doing his or her level best to impart knowledge. I had a young person describe to me recently that going to school is like getting on an aeroplane. You put all your trust and confidence in somebody at the front that you don't really know, and you have to turn off all your electronic devices. It's the conventional way of doing things, and it's a model that has endured for literally thousands of years. Look at Raphael's depiction of Plato's Academy, the Western world's first higher education institution. You've got Plato at the front of the class in a fetching pink and purple toga, and around him are his pupils, sat down at their little stone desks, listening to him and dutifully taking notes. Ask a modern child anywhere in the world to draw a school, and you'll get a pretty similar picture, albeit one that won't make it onto the walls of the Vatican. Now, that's not to say the traditional model of teaching doesn't work. I mean, it certainly didn't do Aristotle any harm, and I'm sure many of you are delivering or have previously received a fantastic education in that way. But it's not the only way of delivering world-class education. For example, when the Open University launched 45 years ago, we didn't just start a new chapter in higher education, we wrote a whole new book. No entry requirements, no campus, lectures conducted using the very latest cutting-edge technology, as I said, the color television, designed on a blank sheet of paper and built from the bottom up. The OU was unlike anything that had gone before. A truly unique institution, a revolutionary idea. But boy, were there a lot of people skeptical about it. The tyranny of conventional wisdom said that our exciting, new, simple model couldn't work, that a worthwhile higher education could only be obtained by spending 3 years sitting in lecture halls for several hours each day. The OU's first ever secretary, Anastasios Christodoulou, recalled being told that he would be mad to get involved with the project. Walter Perry, our founding Vice-Chancellor, said he faced downright hostility from most of the academic world. And Ian MacLeod, the Chancellor of the Exchequer under Ted Heath, needed just 2 words to sum up what he thought of the whole idea of the Open University: blithering nonsense.